I'm Niall Paterson. Welcome to the Sky News Daily, where we have major breaking news on two fronts today. A little later, we'll talk about Wales' new First Minister, Vaughan Gething. But we begin in the Republic of Ireland, where the Taoiseach, the Irish Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, has sent shockwaves through Irish and European politics by announcing his resignation.
When I became party leader and Taoiseach back in June 2017, I knew that one part of leadership is knowing when the time has come to pass on the baton to somebody else, and then having the courage to do it. That time is now. Politicians are human beings, and we have our limitations. We give it everything until we can't anymore, and then we have to move on. I know inevitably there'll be speculation as to the quote-unquote real reason for my decision. These are the real reasons.
So, why resign? Why do it now? And who will replace the two-time Prime Minister of Ireland? Well, let's speak to our Ireland correspondent, Stephen Murphy, joining us on the line from outside that government building in Dublin where the announcement was made. Stephen, great to see you. Look, you know me, I always pride myself on knowing the news before it happened. This one took me by surprise. I suspect you too.
No, we all knew it was coming. No, I'm joking. No one had a clue about this. I have never seen such a major, significant political announcement. You call it a bombshell, not inaccurate, being kept so quiet. We were around here all morning because new proposals on assisted dying were actually going to be the top political story of the day, and it is a very significant story. But when you bump into the politicians here in the corridors or just around the place, there was usually get a bit of a hint that something major is coming down the line. We got nothing, absolutely nothing. It's completely just unprecedented. I mean, there has been, if you look back now, the benefit of hindsight, plenty of warning signs for Leo Varadkar. Essentially, the exodus of his party, Fine Gael, the exodus of his sitting TDs or members of the Irish Parliament. So when he formed the coalition government that we have still at the moment in 2020, he had 33 TDs elected. Now 10 of those are quitting. So that's 30% of TDs quitting, before the next general election. That's always going to raise leadership questions and questions about the leadership strategy. And those mumblings and grumblings were certainly amplified earlier this month when the government suffered a really crushing defeat in twin referendums. And clearly, I mean, the word around here is nobody was really planning a heave. It's too close to elections. The European and local elections are just about 7 weeks away. So this wasn't forced upon him as far as anybody can tell by the members of his party. It was a decision that Leo Varadkar made in typically abrupt Leo Varadkar fashion and sprung on us all here in Dublin.
I suppose at times like this, though, Stephen, and you know this about Irish politics as well as I do about British politics, we have the reasons stated by the politician for them stepping aside, and then we have the real reasons. I mean, when he was speaking earlier today, and what I actually have to say I thought was quite an emotional address, he talked about his rationale as being a mix of the personal and the political. But you mentioned those two defeats in referenda. I mean, that must have had something to do with it. Remind us what the referendums were about.
Yeah, well, very briefly, there was two referendums run in tandem with each other. So one was to change the definition of family from being based on marriage to based on something called durable relationships. And the other one was to remove, it's known as the women in the home referendum. It was to remove sexist and outdated language dating from the 30s in the Irish Constitution that referred to a woman's life and duties in the home. So you can see why everyone thought that was a sure thing. Like, surely you couldn't lose that referendum. 74% of Irish voters said no. That was the highest no vote ever in any Irish referendum. And I guarantee if you speak to any of these people here on the street, because we did plenty of it, I'm just outside government buildings here now, there's not 74% of the Irish people that think a woman's place is in the home. That is a completely incorrect reading. This was a vote against vague and unclear replacement language, a failure to explain the legal ramifications, a sense that, sure, the courts will sort it all out. And you're asking people to vote for such uncertainty and vagueness and lack of real tangible consequences. So anyway, that in a nutshell, or a very large nutshell, sorry, Neil, was basically what happened earlier this month. A crushing defeat for Leo Varadkar. Sort of the black eye that the Irish electorate gave the government over these referendums could extend then into some pretty terrible results for Fine Gael candidates when we come to the local and European elections, which are in June. And we all expect an early general election. This government here has 12 more months to run as its term. Its mandate will go to next March. But everybody here, the smart money is on an election being called sometime in the autumn. It could be around the same time as we see a UK general election as well. And clearly his thinking now appears to be, look, the party will be better off without me, and I need to give the new leader, whoever that might be, time to put some clear blue water between us. And his coalition partners, it's a three-party government coalition, are clearly on board with this. They've been saying today that they are willing to work with the new Fine Gael leader. They'll automatically become Taoiseach, and then they'll be in place for a number of months before we can expect to see a general election being called.
So who is it going to be? I mean, there are a number of, as we always say at times like this, and I'm going to ban this phrase after this particular podcast, but the runners and riders. So tell us who they are.
Many of these runners and riders didn't really think that the race was going to start this soon. I mean, it was really more people putting plans in place for after the next general election. But I was looking at the bookies there. They rarely get it wrong, do they, Neil? And they were the early front runner, I suppose, at the moment is a cabinet minister called Simon Harris. He really shot to prominence because he was health minister in early 2020 when COVID-19 started. And he was an absolute daily figure in most Irish people's lives with the daily press conferences. He was given a lot of credit for his calm and steady leadership. Ireland did have one of the strictest lockdown regimes in Europe, but effectively he garnered a lot of attention and a lot of political credit for how he handled the health portfolio during the global pandemic before moving on to other cabinet portfolios. He's very widely fancied. He's a very affable, softly spoken. He's very young. He's only 37, actually. He's a family man from Wicklow. Very nice to talk to, and it really conceals an inner steely streak, which could stand him in very good stead. There's another Simon, very well known to UK audiences from Brexit. That's Simon Coveney. He was the former Minister for Foreign Affairs. He holds another portfolio at the moment, but he really spearheaded Ireland's diplomatic effort to avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland post-Brexit. Again, widely regarded, very wily, very capable operator. But look, you could do worse than slipping a few quid on Simon Harris, I think.
I think you might have a point there. Look, Stephen, I understand you, on days like this, you are incredibly busy, so we will let you go, but not before asking for your reflections on Leo Varadkar.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt he made history. He made history from the day he became leader of Fine Gael and became Taoiseach, the youngest ever Irish Prime Minister or Taoiseach, the first Taoiseach we've ever had in this country of mixed race, half Indian, half Irish. And then he came out as gay in a radio interview just before Ireland had its referendum on same-sex marriage equality. So you have these sort of easy markers in terms of his legacy. When he stepped down just through those gates a short while ago, it was instructive to listen to how he wanted to shape his legacy as well. He brought in Brexit very high up that list, as well as obviously leaving the economy on a very stable footing, which it is at the moment, full employment here in Ireland. So these are the sort of things that Leo Varadkar clearly feels that he has achieved during his time, 2 spells in the Taoiseach's office, and that's what he wants to be remembered for. He said himself with uncharacteristic humour, he has a very dry sense of humour, to be fair. He said there'll be some people who'll be okay with me stepping aside, with me leaving. But he said, I'm sure you'll forgive me if you leave it to other people to basically outline what all his flaws were and what all his failures were. But I think if you speak to most people here, it's a bit of a mixed legacy. He has achieved a lot, but Ireland still has many social issues. And certainly the government has failed to deliver on things like housing. Ireland's still in the grip of a housing crisis, affordable housing, the homelessness crisis, and Ireland's ever-creaking health system and hospital admission and waiting lists, those sort of things. I don't think really the government stepped up to the mark on the promises when they came into power and when Leo Varadkar took this office. A very occasionally abrupt and brusque person who does things in his own style. And the way he set his farewell in motion here, I think, is another classic example of that. The phrase typical Leo was heard quite often around this place today.
We will be back in just a moment when we'll be discussing Welsh politics and the new First Minister there, Vaughan Gething. To Wales now, where Vaughan Gething, former Health Minister, former Finance Minister, is now First Minister. And after a bruising election campaign in which he didn't get the backing of a majority of Labour Assembly members, his in-tray overfloweth.
Today, we turn a page in the book of our nation's history. Not just because I have the honour of becoming the first black leader in any European country, but because the generational dial has jumped too. Devolution is not something that I have had to get used to or to adapt to or to apologise for. Devolution Welsh solutions to Welsh problems and opportunities is in my blood. It's what I've always known through my adult political life. And I want us to use this moment as a starting point for a more confident march into the future.
Tomos Evans is Sky's Wales reporter. Tomos, welcome. Let's start with Vaughan Gething himself. A fascinating character. I've interviewed him a few times over the years, but his backstory is really compelling. Tell us about it.
It is. Vaughan Gething was born in Zambia. His father, a Welsh vet, and his mother, a Zambian farmer. And they moved when he was only 2 years old as a family to Abergavenny in Monmouthshire. And Vaughan Gething, during the campaign and prior to that, has been very open in the past about the prejudice that his family faced. He joined the party when he's only 17 years old, and that was ahead of the 1992 elections. So he's been involved with the party for a very long time. He studied law at Aberystwyth University and then qualified as a solicitor at Cardiff University, and he was president of the National Union of Students of Wales as well. So since a very young age, been involved in the political landscape.
And he's had, I wouldn't say a meteoric rise to success, but he took his first ministerial post, didn't he, back in 2013. He was the first black minister in a devolved assembly. Yeah,
that's right. So he was appointed the Deputy Minister for Tackling Poverty back in 2013, and He's held a raft of different cabinet level positions ever since then, and having had over 10 years of experience, probably most notably Health Minister, a role which he held for the vast majority of the pandemic.
But of course, look, internal battles can always be incredibly damaging, and this is, after all, the Labour Party that we're talking about. So I suspect it hasn't exactly been a smooth run in to becoming Wales' next First Minister for Vaughan Gething.
No, it was a close run thing in the end, really, and sort of reminiscent in a way of that Brexit divide. It was around 52% for Mr Gething and 48% for Education Minister Jeremy Miles, his opponent in the race. There were some controversies along the way during the campaign as well. Mr Miles made accusations of a stitch-up about a union nomination, but Unite said that this was within the rules, that Mr Miles was ineligible to be the union's candidate, and that was something that had created a bit of disquiet among some within the Labour Party, but also questions in terms of financial donations and a £200,000 donation made to Vaughan Gething's leadership campaign. So Vaughan Gething does have a full in tray when it comes to policy. I mean, there are things, for example, like Senate reform. They're looking to increase the number of Senate members from 60 to 96 before the next election in 2026. But first of all, I think it's a case of having to try and unite the Welsh Labour Party around him and, of course, building a cabinet. You have to remember that the majority of Welsh Senedd members in the Labour Party actually supported Jeremy Miles for the leadership and not Vaughan Gething. So it'll take some time, I think, for that sense of unity and purpose now to be restored.
So, notwithstanding the questions that continue to circle Mr Gething and those contributions, ahead of the general election, he has a lot more to do than simply unite the party.
Winning is one thing, but governing is altogether different, and he can't simply assume that everybody is going to roll over and just accept this. Richard Wyn Jones is Director of the Wales Governance Centre and Dean of Public Affairs at Cardiff University. How prone are Welsh Labour to the sort of infighting that we see nationally amongst the Conservatives? Well, actually, this has been one of Welsh Labour's great strengths over the years, is they've managed to be very disciplined. They managed to keep their tensions which absolutely exist, but they managed to keep a lid on it externally. One of the interesting things over the last few days is to see the deep unhappiness of so many senior Labour people in Wales. So he was starting from a disadvantage in terms of party management, and the way that he's gone about winning his very, very narrow victory has alienated them still further. And as you said, he's now got this complicated job in terms of constructing a cabinet. On the one hand, his supporters, many of whom have been waiting for government jobs for a long time, I suspect will be expecting to see their reward, to be very crude about it, but also he will need somehow or other to assuage his opponents. And all of this in what we're expecting to be a general election year. Is that going to be playing on Gething's mind as he tries to reunite Welsh Labour? This does not make really any significant difference at all to the next UK general election in Wales. Labour have won every UK general election in Wales since 1922. The Conservatives last won an election in Wales in 1859. So we are in a position where the problem that Labour have is the devolved election in 2026 in a couple of years' time. And, you know, there is history. If you remember, some people listening will remember back to the first devolved election.
1999.
When Plaid Cymru actually outperformed the SNP. And the reason Plaid Cymru did so well is that Labour voters were deeply unhappy at the way that Alan Michael had been imposed as Labour's leader in Wales. There was a sense of illegitimacy around that, and the Welsh electorate showed the Labour Party that they can't be taken for granted. And the danger for Vaughan Gething, the danger for the Welsh Labour Party, is that he's starting his tenureship in such a weak position that he doesn't really recover from that.
Clearly, Vaughan Gething needs to hit the ground running in terms of his role as First Minister. So in terms of the abilities of the Senate, the Assembly to legislate, the powers that they have, what is going to be top of the list? I mean, I know, anecdotally, 20-mile-an-hour speed limits have not gone down particularly well with a lot of people there. We understand that the farmers are grumbling again. And of course, because it constantly gets mentioned at Prime Minister's questions by Rishi Sunak, the Welsh NHS is in need of a bit of a heart start as well.
It's a really challenging entry, but health absolutely dominates the powers of the Welsh Parliament, the powers of the Welsh Government. We're a sick population. The health service is under extreme pressure. He's a former health minister, of course, Vaughan Gething. So I think that is going to be very, very, very high up on his list. So he's got to construct a cabinet in a context of a very divided party. He's then got a very challenging policy agenda. Public finances are straitened, to say the least. And at some point relatively soon, he's going to lose the excuse that every Welsh government has had since David Cameron became Prime Minister way back when, is, well, actually, we're not getting enough money from London because, you know, it's going to be much more difficult to blame London.
Just on that point then, what is the working relationship like between Welsh Labour and the National Party, between Vaughan Gething and Keir Starmer?
The relationship in public has been kind of correct. Behind the scenes, there's been much more tension. There are several elements to that. One is that when you're in power in Wales and you've got Keir Starmer and his shadow cabinet criticising the Conservatives in government in London, there's a danger that what they say as a criticism of the London government actually resonates in the Welsh context as well. And I think that there's been a sense in the Welsh government that maybe Keir Starmer and his shadow cabinet haven't always been careful in that regard. And there's also this kind of ongoing Labour Party psychodrama, everything read in kind of left-right terms. And Matt Drakeford obviously was a person on the left of the Labour Party. I think people around Keir Starmer have kind of thought to themselves that Mark Drakeford was awkward because he was from the left. Actually, any Welsh leader who's got any sense is always going to be trying to differentiate themselves from London. You know, you don't do kind of devolved politics by saying we're London's guys in Wales. That just does not. That's been the big mistake of Scottish Labour. Welsh Labour, from very, very early days, understood that you need to differentiate your brand. You need to be the party standing up for Wales against London, no matter who's in power in London. And so I suspect that whoever leads Labour in Wales will be a thorn in the side of the British Labour leader to some extent.
Richard, thank you. And that's your lot for today. We'll see you again soon.